You can have the bookstore. My brother didn't even look up from the attorney's desk when he said it. He was scrolling through something on his phone, his thumb moving in lazy arcs, completely unbothered by the fact that we had just buried our father 3 days ago. I'll take the house, the investment accounts, and the rental property on Clearwater, he continued. The bookstore is a liability. It's got $40,000 in outstanding debt, a lease that's 6 months overdue, and a customer base that's mostly dead. He finally looked up and gave me what I recognized as his generous smile, the one he used when he was offering you something he'd already decided was worthless. Honestly, I'm doing you a favor. Clean break for both of us. His wife nodded from the chair beside him, her ankles crossed, her handbag resting in her lap like she was waiting for a flight. She had the expression of someone watching a transaction they expected to go smoothly. I looked at the attorney. He was staring at a point somewhere above our heads, which told me everything I needed to know about how he felt professionally obligated to stay neutral. I said, "That's not what Dad's will says." My brother set his phone face down on the desk. "Dad's will says the estate gets divided equally. I'm offering you an equal share. The bookstore's appraised value roughly balances against 1/3 of the Clearwater property. The bookstore has negative value, Marcus. Then we're even." He picked his phone back up. "Look, I've already talked to a demolition company. The building's on a prime corner lot. If we sell to a developer now, we split the land value and both walk away clean. But if you want to be sentimental about it," he gestured vaguely. "The way you gesture at something that isn't your problem anymore, you can have it. All of it. The books, the debt, the 40 years of Dad's hoarding. Take it or leave it." I looked out the window. The street outside was gray and still, the kind of afternoon in late October that feels like the world is waiting for something to end. I said, "I'll take it." He blinked. His wife uncrossed her ankles. "You're serious. I'll take the bookstore." He leaned back and studied me for a moment like he was trying to figure out if I was negotiating or genuinely naive. Then he shrugged, turned back to the attorney, and said, "Draw it up." He signed the papers before I finished reading them. He had somewhere to be. My father's bookstore had been on the corner of Elm and 4th Street in Hargrove, Ohio for 41 years. It was called Whitfield Books, which was our last name, which meant that every time someone in town drove past it, they were driving past a piece of our family history nailed to the side of a building. My brother had not been inside it in 11 years. I knew this because the last time he visited, he complained about the smell, old paper, and machine oil, and something he called the specific odor of irrelevance. He had a gift for cruelty dressed as honesty. I had worked there every summer through high school, every holiday through college, and most weekends for the 3 years since I'd moved back to Hargrove to be closer to my father after his first stroke. I knew the inventory the way I knew my own handwriting. I knew which floorboard creaked near the poetry section. I knew that my father kept his ordering ledgers in a green accordion folder behind the front counter, and that he cataloged his stock in a system that only made sense if you'd grown up watching him build it. I also knew that the store had money problems. That was real. But I had never understood why the problems were as bad as they appeared on paper, because the foot traffic, while modest, was steady. The regulars were loyal. My father had been careful his entire life. The debt made no sense to me, and the things that don't make sense are the things I can't let go of. I am a records archivist for the county library system. My entire professional existence is built on the idea that the answer is always in the documents if you know how to look. The week after I took possession of the store, I started looking. The first night, I slept on the reading couch in the back corner, under a quilt my grandmother made in 1987. The heat in the building was functional but barely, and the radiators knocked and hissed through the night like an old man trying to get comfortable. My brother had texted me twice since the signing, once to confirm I was still seriously doing this, once to tell me the demolition company would honor the same quote for 60 days just in case you come to your senses. I set my phone on the floor, face down, and stared at the ceiling. I thought about the last conversation I had with my father, 6 weeks before he died. He had been sitting in this exact spot, in this chair, with a cup of chamomile tea going cold on the side table. He had seemed distracted in a way that was different from his usual distraction, quieter, more deliberate. He had said, "There are things in this building that I haven't dealt with, Rachel. Things I kept meaning to sort out and never did." I had assumed he was talking about inventory. He always had boxes he hadn't cataloged, donations from estates that piled up near the back door. I had said I'd help him with it after the holidays. He had nodded slowly and looked toward the back of the store, not at anything specific, just at the wall, and he had said, "Make sure you look behind things, not just at them." I had thought he was being philosophical, lying on that couch, in the dark, listening to the radiator and the wind off the street. I started to think he wasn't. The debt took me 2 days to untangle. The $40,000 my brother cited had not accumulated naturally. The store's operating costs were manageable. The debt was almost entirely concentrated in one category: climate control, maintenance. Specifically, an HVAC contractor had been billing the store quarterly for a specialized system that my father had installed 8 years ago. The system was flagged in the records as extended storage archive preservation. But the archive room I knew about was a converted supply closet near the back staircase, maybe 12 by 12. where my father kept the few truly old books he'd acquired over the years. Climate control for that space would cost a few $100s a year, not tens of thousands. I pulled out the building blueprints from the county records office. Then I stood in the back of the store and compared what I was looking at to what the blueprints told me should be there. The dimensions didn't match. The back wall of the store sat 6 feet closer to the front than the property line suggested it should. Not dramatically, not noticeably, unless you were standing there with a measurement tape and a blueprint. But 6 feet across the full width of the building added up to a room that was behind the back wall. A room that had been climate controlled for 8 years. Quietly, expensively, while my father kept paying for it, and my brother called the debt a liability and a death sentence for the store. I found the seam in the paneling on my third pass. It was at the back of a deep shelving unit my father had built himself, the one that held the reference section. The unit swung out when I found the correct panel to press, not dramatically, just enough to show the edge of a door frame. The door was locked, but my father's keys were on a hook by the back entrance, the same hook they'd been on for 40 years. And the fourth key I tried opened it. The air that came through the door was cold and dry, and faintly chemical, the precise, controlled atmosphere of archival preservation. It was the air of a place designed to keep something from aging. I reached inside and felt the wall for a switch. The lights came on. I stood very still in the doorway for a long time. The room ran the full width of the building. It was lined, floor to ceiling, with custom-built wooden shelving, each shelf padded with archival foam. The books on those shelves were not ordinary. They were stored flat, many in individual clamshell boxes, the kind of enclosures you only build for something irreplaceable. There were manuscripts, actual handwritten manuscripts in sealed archival envelopes. There were first editions in protective cases with dehumidifying inserts. There were titles I recognized from my work at the library. Titles I knew appeared on auction records with numbers attached to them that I had always assumed were errors. There was a ledger on the table beside the door. My father's handwriting. I sat down on the floor and read it from the first page. My father had spent 40 years curating a collection. Not haphazardly. Not by accident. He had built it with the patience and specificity of someone who understood exactly what he was looking for and exactly how long it would take. He had started acquiring the anchor pieces in his 20s, before the store existed, when he was a graduate student in literature and had access to estate sales that other buyers overlooked. He had continued through every year the store was open, treating the back room as both his life's work and his retirement plan. The ledger documented every acquisition, purchase price, provenance, estimated current value, and his personal notes on significance. Some entries were brief, others ran for pages. The anchor of the collection was a folio format manuscript, first draft, annotated, of a novel that every American high school student has read. The author's personal copy, with handwritten margin notes documenting his revisions from draft to published text. My father had acquired it from a private estate sale in 1987 for $400, because the family hadn't known what they had and hadn't wanted to wait for an appraiser. He knew what he had. I called my colleague Dara the next morning. Dara was the special collections librarian at Ohio State, which meant she spent her professional life doing exactly what I had just spent my night doing, understanding what rare documents were worth and why. I told her I needed her to come to Hargrove. She asked if it was urgent. I said, "I need you to bring your gloves." Dara arrived on a Saturday. She was professional and composed and completely silent for the first 20 minutes she spent in the room. I had learned, working alongside her for 7 years, that Dara's silence was not absence. It was concentration at high intensity. When she finally turned to face me, she had taken off her glasses and was holding them in one hand. "Rachel," she said, "I know. Your father assembled this over 40 years? According to the ledger, yes." She looked back at the shelves. The manuscript alone, she stopped. Started again. The manuscript alone would draw significant attention at auction. But the full collection, properly marketed to the right buyers, with the provenance documentation your father kept, she exhaled slowly. "I don't want to give you numbers right now because I'm not in a position to be accurate. But I need you to understand that what you're looking at is not a bookstore's back room. What you're looking at is a private collection of national literary significance." I had known this was coming, roughly, from the ledger. But hearing it said aloud by someone whose professional judgment I trusted completely was different from knowing it in the abstract. I sat down in the chair by the door. How long to get a proper appraisal? For something of this scope? 6 weeks minimum. I know people at Christie's. I also know the rare books specialist at the Newberry Library in Chicago, and she would lose her mind if she saw this. Dara was still looking at the shelves. Her voice had taken on a quality I had never heard from her before, a careful reverence, like she was trying not to disturb the air. "Who else knows this is here?" I thought about my brother, who had not been inside this building in 11 years. I thought about his wife, waiting by the window at the attorney's office with her handbag on her lap. I thought about the demolition quote that was good for 60 more days. "Just me," I said. The call came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after I had taken possession of the store. My brother's voice had a specific register he used when he was pretending to do me a favor. I had grown up hearing it. It was helpful the way a closed hand is helpful. I've had another offer on the lot, he said. Developer wants the whole corner you're building, the parking strip, everything. They need an answer in 2 weeks. I own the building, Marcus. You own the building with $40,000 in debt and no viable operating revenue. I did the numbers. Even if you reopen, you're not clearing that debt in the next decade. The developer is offering fair market on the land. We split it. You walk away clean. You don't have to spend the next 10 years trying to run a store that Dad himself couldn't keep afloat. I looked at the door to the back room, which was closed, which looked like any other section of paneling in the wall behind the reference shelves. What's the offer? I asked. He told me. It was not a bad number. For the land. For an empty lot on a corner in Hargrove, Ohio, it was a reasonable number. For what was actually in that building, it was almost comically inadequate. I need a little more time, I said. You have 2 weeks. I understand. There was a pause. He had expected resistance or capitulation. My neutrality confused him slightly. You're not going to fight me on this? I'm thinking about it, I said. That's all. He exhaled in the way that meant he found me exhausting but was choosing to be patient. 2 weeks, Rachel. Dara came back with 2 colleagues 10 days later. A rare book specialist from the Newberry, and a manuscript appraiser who had spent 30 years working with major auction houses before going independent. They spent 2 full days in the room. I brought them coffee and stayed out of their way. On the evening of the second day, the 3 of them sat with me at the table in the front of the store, the one my father had used for author readings. The manuscript appraiser, a quiet, angular man named Victor who communicated mostly through precise, careful sentences, said, "We've completed our preliminary assessment. A full documented appraisal will take additional time, but I can give you a working figure now." I nodded. He named a number. It was not the number I had expected. It was higher. The rare book specialist from the Newberry pressed her fingertips to the table and said, "The manuscript is the centerpiece, but the collection around it is extraordinary in its own right. The curation is deliberate. Whoever built this understood literary history with unusual depth." "My father," I said. She nodded slowly. "The collection tells a story. That matters to serious buyers. It matters to institutions. This isn't a grab bag of valuable items. This is an argument about American literature, assembled over a lifetime." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "How long to bring it to market properly?" Victor said, 4 months, possibly 3 if we move the documentation along quickly. I have relationships with buyers who would want first look before it goes to open auction. But my recommendation is auction. The competitive environment will drive the number up considerably. I thanked them and drove home. And I sat in my father's reading chair in the dark store and thought about the demolition quote that was good for 30 more days. I thought about what my father had said, sitting in this same chair, 6 weeks before he died. Make sure you look behind things, not just at them. I understood now that he had been trying to tell me something specific. I understood that he had known Marcus would do what he did, and had known I would do what I did, and had left me the store not as a consolation prize but as a trust. The debt was real. The debt was also almost precisely calibrated to make the store look like a burden rather than an inheritance. My father was not a man who made accidental decisions. I picked up my phone. I called Marcus 2 days later and told him I was reconsidering. The store, I explained, was more trouble than I'd anticipated. The debt was real, the building needed work, and I wasn't in a financial position to absorb the carrying costs while trying to reopen. The developer's offer was starting to look reasonable. He was generous about it. Of course he was. This was the outcome he had expected from the beginning. "Smart," he said. "I'll send the contact information." "Before we talk to the developer," I said, "I need your help with something. I've been trying to clear out the inventory. You know how much stuff Dad accumulated in there. Some of the older donations are a legal gray area. Apparently, if there's anything of potential value in uncatalogued donations, the donor's estate could theoretically make a claim against the store. That's insane. It's a real liability exposure." My attorney flagged it. I did, in fact, have an attorney. I had hired her specifically for this conversation. She drafted a document that releases the store and by extension both of us, since we were co-heirs from any liability related to the existing inventory. Basically, it defines the inventory as the store's property, held for disposal, with no third-party claims. He was quiet for a moment. "Why does this need my signature?" "Because you were co-heir until the signing. Technically, your interest in the estate created a shared liability window." There was another pause. I kept my voice even, slightly worried. "The way you sound when you're asking for administrative help, rather than conceding anything important." "It's a standard release," I said. "My attorney said it's 1 page. I can send it over this afternoon." "Fine," he said. "Just send it." I sent it that afternoon. He signed it and returned it within the hour, without reading it carefully, which I had expected because he considered the store worthless, and paperwork about worthless things a formality rather than a document. His attorney, when consulted a month later, would confirm that the release was binding. It was, in fact, a standard release. It defined the store's existing inventory, all of it, including the contents of the archive room as the property of the store, held without encumbrance, which meant that when I subsequently transferred the store's assets to a preservation trust I established for the purpose of the sale, the collection transferred cleanly. My attorney had been very specific about the language. She was good at her job. She had also, when she understood what she was protecting, dropped her retainer by half and told me to let her know if I needed anything else. The auction was held 4 months and 12 days after I first opened the door to the back room. Victor had been right about the competitive environment. The manuscript went to a university library in the Midwest that had been quietly trying to acquire it for a decade without knowing it existed. The rest of the collection drew private collectors, 2 major institutions, and a foundation whose representatives flew in from London. I watched most of it on a laptop in the back of the store, because I didn't want to be in the room. I had spent 4 months handling that collection with the same care my father had spent 40 years building it, and I had said my goodbyes to it already, privately, in the way you say goodbye to something that was never really yours to keep, but was yours to protect for a while. The final number came in just under $900,000 below Victor's upper estimate, which still left me with more money than I had imagined sitting on a couch in my father's store on a cold October night, reading a ledger by flashlight. I paid off the store's debt that afternoon. I called my brother that evening. He had been texting me about the developer for 3 weeks. The developer had moved on to another property, which meant the window had closed, which meant my brother was frustrated in the specific way he got frustrated when outcomes didn't match his projections. When he answered, he had the tone of someone who had already decided what this conversation was about. I let him finish his sentence. Then I said, I wanted to let you know that the bookstore's debt has been paid in full as of today. A pause. You refinanced? No. I liquidated some of the store's assets. What assets? You had $40,000 in inventory that wasn't worth. Dad had a private collection in the building, I said. In a room behind the reference shelves. He'd been building it for 40 years. Silence. I had it appraised and brought to auction through Christie's, I said. It sold last week. More silence. When he spoke again, something had shifted in his voice. What kind of collection? Rare books. First editions. A manuscript. I told him the name of the book. Every American high school student has read it. He had too. The silence this time was different. It had a quality I had never heard from him before, a kind of structural failure, like weight bearing down on something that couldn't hold. How much? He said. I told him. I heard him exhale. A long, unsteady breath that he tried to control, and didn't quite manage. His wife said something in the background. He didn't answer her. That was in the building, he said. That was in the building the whole time. Behind the reference shelves. He built the room himself, apparently. Had the climate control installed 8 years ago. I offered you the demolition split. His voice had changed again. It was flatter now. I offered you we could have split the land value. Rachel, you offered me the building, I said. I took it. Another pause. The release you sent me. He said it slowly, like he was working through it. The liability release. Standard document, I said. My attorney drafted it. The silence that followed was not like his previous silences. His previous silences were pauses between thoughts. This one had a different texture. This was the silence of a person standing in a room and realizing, all at once, that the room is much smaller than they thought. His wife said something else in the background. He still didn't answer her. The inventory was the store's property, I said. You co-signed the release. Your attorney reviewed it. I knew from my own attorney that he had. In fact, had his attorney glance at it, and it was exactly what it said it was. Rachel, I'm going to buy back the house, I said. I'm making an offer this week. I'd like to have it back in the family. He made a sound that wasn't a word. I had never heard that sound from him before. It was the sound of someone who has spent their life being the one who decides things, trying to process a moment in which they were not the one who decided. You knew, he said. You knew what was in there. I looked, I said. That's all. I just looked. I own the bookstore and the house now. The store is open on Thursdays through Sundays, by appointment on weekdays, because that's what a store built around a serious collection requires. I rehired the 2 part-time staff members who worked for my father. I kept his ordering ledger system, because it's actually excellent once you understand its logic. I kept the reading couch in the back corner, under my grandmother's quilt, because some things are not for sale. The archive room is still there, behind the reference shelves. It's empty of the collection now, which makes it look larger than it did, though it's exactly the same size it always was. I've been thinking about what to do with it. Dara has opinions. Victor has opinions. I have a list of my own. My father spent 40 years building something in secret, in a room behind a wall, in a building my brother wrote off as a rotting tooth in the family's portfolio. He paid to maintain it quietly, methodically, without drama, and he left it to me without a note or an explanation, because he believed I would look behind things. He was the kind of man who kept his faith in people privately, and paid for it over time. He never argued with my brother. He never defended himself when Marcus talked about the store's debt at Thanksgiving. He never told me directly what he had built or what it meant. He just kept the door locked and the climate controlled and the ledger current, and he waited for the right person to have the right key and enough patience to use it. I keep the store's sign lit now, even in the evenings when we're not open. The corner of Elm and 4th looks different with a lit sign than it did with a dark one. People slow down when they drive past. Sometimes they come back the next morning and knock. My brother has not been in touch since our last phone call. His wife sent a single text message that I did not respond to. Their attorney sent a letter that my attorney handled. The house is ours again. The floors still creak in the same places. My father's chair is back in the corner of the living room where it spent 30 years. Some nights I sit in it after the store closes and read, the way he used to, until the light gets too low and the quiet gets too complete, and I have to remind myself that this is not a temporary situation, that this is actually, genuinely, mine. He kept the word ours in a room I didn't know about for 40 years, and handed it to me when it was time. I'm still learning what to do with that kind of love, but I'm learning.